Welcome to Tangled Logic. Of the hundreds of stories I've covered on this channel, today's is easily going to rank in the top 5 most distressing. While there isn't any graphic footage or images included, there is a very upsetting sequence that happens at the end of the story. For that reason, viewer discretion is advised. If you're a fan of the strange, dark and mysterious delivered in story format, you've come to the right place because that's all we do. We upload once or twice every week. If that's of interest to you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Alright, let's get into today's story. In 1986, Tom Hawks was a 39-year-old father of 2 teenage boys. He had previously been married to his boys' mother, but they had ultimately gotten a divorce. That year, Tom and his 2 sons were at a local chili cook-off in their neighborhood in Newport Beach, California. Tom was looking out across the sea of people when he saw a stunningly beautiful woman he'd never seen before. He found himself staring at her so long that she noticed, looked up, kind of smiled and blushed, and then looked away. Tom was immediately embarrassed because he'd just been caught staring. He decided, "You know what? I have to go over there and introduce myself." Tom, this ruggedly handsome, muscular guy with an incredible mustache, strode across the lawn. He walked up to this woman and introduced himself. She was all smiles and said her name was Jackie. She was 29 years old and single. From that point onward, those 2 completely hit it off. They fell madly in love, and just a few years later, in 1989, they got married in front of 150 of their closest friends and family. After the wedding, Jackie moved in with Tom and his 2 boys. Even though the boys' mother was still alive, they began calling Jackie Mom. Jackie not only lived with them, but was also so devoted to them. She was such a loving and kind person that it just made sense to do that. Jackie, when she was 22 years old, had gotten into a horrific motorcycle accident. The internal damage that accident had done to her left her unable to have kids of her own, something she had always wanted to do. So, when she had the opportunity to be these boys' mother, she really leaned into it. She was a fabulous mother. Over the years, Tom and Jackie raised their 2 sons. Then, in 2002, when the boys were all grown up, they left the house. This was a sad moment for Tom and Jackie, suddenly being empty nesters. So much of their identity was wrapped up in being parents, and they were very close with their sons. At the same time, they knew this day was coming and had actually been preparing for it for several years. They had been putting money aside every single year to prepare for when their sons left because they wanted to time it so they could retire at the same time. Their idea of retirement was to go buy a yacht and just live on the yacht, sailing up and down the California and Mexican coastline. Neither Jackie nor Tom were wealthy at all. However, they were very good at saving money and were very disciplined. They could live frugally. Over the past couple of years, they had saved virtually every penny so they could afford to buy this yacht. Finally, in 2002, when their sons did leave, Tom and Jackie sold their house in Newport Beach, California. Between the proceeds from the sale of their house and all the money they had set aside, they had enough to purchase this kind of beat-up old small yacht. They named this yacht the Well-Deserved. Even though this yacht was by no means glamorous, as you might imagine, Tom and Jackie adored this boat. As soon as it was theirs and they had docked it in Newport, they moved all of their belongings onto it because they were going to live on this boat. Then they began meticulously cleaning it, organizing it, and upgrading it everywhere they could within their limited budget. By the summer of that year, this boat was beautiful, both on the outside and the inside. It was very cozy and clearly had the touch of Tom and Jackie. It was a home. For the next 2 years, Tom and Jackie lived the dream. They took that yacht and just sailed up and down the coast of California and Mexico. They would watch beautiful sunsets, catch fresh fish, and drink cocktails together. They were really enjoying their retirement. Then, in 2004, they got some unexpected news. One of their sons told them that he was expecting to be a father. This baby was going to be Tom and Jackie's first grandchild, and they were so excited, especially Jackie. Remember, she wasn't able to have kids of her own, and she just loved the idea of getting to be motherly again and holding this precious little baby. So, even though Tom and Jackie were absolutely loving living out on this yacht, they decided that the time was right to actually sell the yacht. They planned to take the proceeds from the sale and buy a house on land to be closer to their son and this grandbaby. In November of that year, the Hawks placed an ad in a fishing magazine for the sale of their yacht. They were asking for about $500,000. Very quickly after this ad went live, a young couple who had saved up some cash offered to buy it. Tom and Jackie were totally thrilled. They called their two sons to tell them the good news. They had a buyer, and in the next couple of days, the sale would be finalized, and then they would be in touch. So, the sons expected to get a phone call from Tom and Jackie any day. But a couple of days went by, and they hadn't heard from them. The sons began calling their parents, but their parents weren't picking up their phone. Tom and Jackie were not the type to go any amount of time without being in touch with their family, so this was very uncharacteristic. When Tom's brother Jim, who was a retired police chief, heard about this sudden silence, he immediately got in his car and drove to Newport Beach, California. He wanted to see if maybe they hadn't finalized the sale of the yacht and perhaps the couple was still on the yacht. He could check in with them and make sure everything was okay. So, Jim, along with a friend of his, arrived in Newport Beach. They made their way to the dock where the yacht was being held. They went down to the floating section of the dock and walked right up alongside the Well-Deserved. From where they were standing, it didn't seem like anyone was on the yacht. However, as they stood there, just kind of looking at the yacht right in front of them, Jim noticed a couple of oddities. He saw lines hanging over the side of the boat that should have been stowed. Tom was known for being incredibly meticulous and orderly. That yacht was always spick and span. He would not have left these lines draped over the edge of the boat unless he was on board, and he wasn't. Jim also looked around and saw a couple of tarps that went over some of the control panels had been taken off, but then not put back on the control panels. Again, that's not something Tom or Jackie would have done. There were also some dirty towels kind of hanging out of one of the portholes. So, overall, the impression Jim and his friend got was, I guess they must have finalized the sale of this yacht, because clearly the new owners of this boat are the ones that are in possession of it, and they're the reason it's sloppy. Tom and Jackie never would leave the boat in this condition. So, Jim pulled out his own business card and wrote a note on it saying he was looking to speak with the new owners of this boat because his brother and his brother's wife had sold this boat to them, but now they were missing. He asked them to please call him back. Jim and his friend left the boat and the dock and began to leave the area when Jim's cell phone rang. He picked it up and it was a 21-year-old woman named Jennifer De Leon. She told Jim that she got his business card on her yacht and that, yes, she and her husband had recently purchased this yacht from the Hawks. But like Jim, they were having a hard time getting in touch with the Hawks as well. After acquiring their boat, Jennifer said she and her husband realized there were a couple of controls on the boat that they didn't know how to use, so they needed to talk to Tom and Jackie to explain how to use them. Also, Jennifer said she had found some personal belongings that belonged to Tom and Jackie stuffed in a couple of drawers that just got left behind. She wanted to return that property to them as well, but she was telling Jim, I'm trying to get in touch with them and I can't. Jim asked Jennifer, when was the last time you or your husband saw Tom or Jackie? She said, the last time we saw them was when we actually finalized the sale of the boat, when we literally gave them the money and we watched them take the money, hop in their car and drive away. Jim asked her if she had any idea where they might have been going. Jennifer said, you know, we really didn't have that many personal conversations with Tom or Jackie. It was mostly just business stuff. But in the limited personal interactions we did have, Tom would always talk about how he and Jackie planned on buying a house in Mexico, in this town that bordered Arizona, because apparently they have a son that lives in Arizona, and he's about to have a baby, and they were talking about how they wanted to be very close. Jim thanked Jennifer and asked her, if you hear from Tom or Jackie, please let me know. Then Jennifer said to Jim, same thing to you. If you hear from them, please let me know because I need to talk to them too. So they hung up and Jim was left thinking, what's going on here? Then Jim remembered there was this woman that Tom and Jackie had hired. Her name was Patricia. For the past couple of years that they had been out on their boat, they knew they would not have great internet, so they would not be able to consistently pay their bills and taxes. So they had hired this woman, Patricia, who was also a friend of theirs, to basically pay their bills and manage their finances. Jim got her number and called Patricia. The first thing he asked her was, "Hey, have you spoken with Tom or Jackie recently?" She said, "No, I haven't." So Jim explained the situation and then asked Patricia, "Has Tom or Jackie recently made a large deposit into any of their accounts? Just a couple of days ago, they would have received nearly $500,000. Patricia checked the accounts and said, "No, there's been no deposits made." Jim and Patricia were talking on the phone, trying to rationalize why Tom and Jackie would not have deposited so much money, and they really couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation for it. After Jim hung up with Patricia, he just had a bad feeling about what was going on. So, Jim called the Newport Beach Police Department and officially reported Tom and Jackie missing. The first thing the Newport Beach Police Department did with this missing person report was to do some digging on the new buyers of this yacht, the De Leons. When they looked at the 25-year-old husband named Skylar, they discovered he was a felon. He had been arrested and convicted of armed robbery and had spent some time in jail for it. Naturally, the police were immediately suspicious of Skylar De Leon, and really the De Leons in general, because they were the last ones to see the Hawks before they went missing. So, they sent one of their detectives down to the dock to just kind of walk around the yacht, and just kind of feel it out, see what was going on down there, see if there was anything unusual. This detective went down to the dock, walked onto the floating section of the dock, and walked right up alongside the well-deserved. From the looks of it, it didn't appear that anybody was on board. As this detective was kind of looking in the window and just kind of looking around, they thought they saw what looked like a bloody handprint inside the boat. That would end up being enough to get a search warrant. Before long that day, there were police swarming this boat, looking all over it. But it would turn out that was not a bloody handprint. It was actually just some rust, and nothing else of significance was found on board this boat. The police were pretty frustrated because they really didn't have any leads. So, they contacted Skylar De Leon and said, "Hey, you need to come into the police station and explain exactly what happened during your final interaction with the Hawks." Skylar came to the police station. He was totally cooperative and explained to the detectives that he saw an ad in a fishing magazine for a yacht. He contacted Tom Hawks and said, "I'm interested." The two of them met up and then went out for a sea trial, which is basically a test drive but for a boat. During the sea trial, Skylar told Tom that he liked the boat and he wanted to go forward with the purchase. So, on November 15th, Skylar, along with his pregnant wife, his young daughter, and also a notary and another person, a friend of Skylar's that was there, just kind of as a witness, they went to the parking lot of the dock, right near where the yacht was. Then the Hawks showed up, Tom and Jackie, and the De Leons literally handed over a suitcase full of cash to Tom. Then Tom and Jackie, with the notary, signed the sale documentation, basically giving the boat over to the De Leons. Tom and Jackie took their suitcase full of cash, hopped in their SUV, and they drove off, presumably to go to Mexico. When the police asked Skylar how he was able to afford such an expensive vessel, Skylar would tell them that back in the 1990s, he was actually a child star, or kind of an extra, on the very popular TV show Power Rangers. From being on that show, he had made a bunch of money and he had set it aside. As Skylar was telling the detectives this, he kind of just stopped himself at some point and was like, "You know what, that's not really the truth. The reality is, the reason we had the money to do this is not because of the cash I got from being a child star, it's actually because I stole the money." It would turn out that the armed robbery that Skylar was convicted for and spent some time in jail for was because he was stealing money from this drug kingpin. Before he was arrested and sent off to jail, he had managed to take the money that he had stolen and hide it. After he had gone to jail and got out again, he came back to his hiding space and just retrieved the money. But this money was stolen drug money, so it was hot. He needed to get rid of it. He needed to launder the money. That was why he was buying this yacht. He was going to buy it with this dirty money in bulk in cash and basically transform this hot, dirty money into this yacht. Then, he was going to sell the yacht and get clean money for it. The police were totally shocked at this confession because Skylar had just completely incriminated himself in a money laundering scheme. But the police would ultimately say to Skylar, "You know what? We're not going to charge you with money laundering because you're being so forthright and helpful with this investigation." So, they let Skylar go, The police would go on to interview Skylar's wife Jennifer, as well as the notary and also that other friend who had come along for that final sale of the boat who was there as a witness. The police interviewed all three of those people and asked them, "What was your final interaction with Tom and Jackie like?" They all described the same situation of seeing Tom and Jackie taking the suitcase full of cash, signing the paperwork, hopping in their car, and driving off. The only detail that seemed to differ amongst these four people who were there was the way Tom and Jackie were acting. Skylar made it seem like Tom was kind of anxious and paranoid about having all this money, whereas the notary said, "You know, Tom and Jackie seemed completely normal to me." After all the interviews with these people who had seen Tom and Jackie last, the police felt like they had kind of reached a dead end and just didn't know what to do next. So they went to the media and asked them to put out a bulletin that had a picture of Tom and Jackie as well as a picture of their vehicle. It asked people to come forward if they had seen them. Sure enough, within a couple of days of this bulletin going out on TV, an older couple in Mexico called the police to say, "The Hawks SUV is right across the street from me right now. It's parked right on the road." Naturally, the Mexican authorities, as well as American authorities, rushed to this location. They charged up to the house where this SUV was parked, expecting to find Jackie and Tom inside or someone that at least knew Tom and Jackie. But when they knocked on the door, a guy nobody recognized, someone who was living in Mexico, came up to the door, looking very confused. The police asked him, "Whose SUV is that parked outside?" He said, "Oh, well, that's my friend's car." They said, "Well, is your friend Tom or Jackie Hawks?" The guy was like, "No, who's that? The car belongs to Skylar de Leon." This was, of course, the moment when the police realized Skylar was lying to them. He had told police the last time he had seen Jackie and Tom, they had hopped in their SUV and they had driven off. But clearly that was not the last time, because he somehow managed to acquire their car afterwards, and then he gave it to this random person in Mexico. The police in Newport Beach used Skylar's money laundering confession on camera to bring him in. They arrested him on money laundering. Then, with him in custody, they searched his home. Inside of his and Jennifer's house, they found all these things that belonged to the Hawks. Things like laptops and video cameras, things Tom and Jackie would not have left behind on the boat. But despite all this evidence connecting Skylar de Leon to the Hawks' disappearance, he maintained his innocence and said this was just a big misunderstanding. While he was in custody, getting grilled by police, his wife Jennifer was also saying the same thing. That Skylar didn't do anything. She was even going on talk shows and talking about how this is just one big misunderstanding and Skylar had nothing to do with the Hawks' disappearance, that they are just as concerned about Tom and Jackie as everybody else is. But the police were not buying it. They knew Skylar knew something that he wasn't telling them, obviously. However, they weren't really getting anywhere interviewing Skylar. He was just kind of saying, "Look, I had nothing to do with it." So, the police decided, let's go back and re-interview the notary and also that other friend who was there as a witness on that day that the final sale of the boat took place. So, they called the notary back into the police department. The notary was this woman named Kathleen Harris, who had never gotten in trouble in her life and had been a very successful notary for a long time. She sat down and they asked her again to describe her final interactions with Tom and Jackie. Once again she said, "Yep, they came over. They signed the paperwork. They took their cash, they got in their SUV and they drove off." But under follow-up, very intensive questioning by the police, Kathleen would finally break. She would say, "Actually, I've never met Tom and Jackie in my entire life. I was paid up front in cash by Skylar de Leon to backdate those sale documents that had already been signed. I have no idea what happened to Tom and Jackie." Next, the police went out and got that friend who was also there at the time of the final sale, that witness. His name was Alonzo Mason. They brought him in and asked him, "What was your final interaction like with Tom and Jackie?" At first he stuck to the story that they got the cash, they hopped in the SUV, they drove off, that's all it was. The police stopped him and were like, we just spoke to the notary and she said she was lying. She wasn't even there. She had backdated those documents, so we know you're lying." As soon as Alonzo got caught red-handed, he began to clam up. It was pretty obvious he did not want to say anything else. Since the police really needed something to happen with this case, they said to Alonzo, "We will make sure your sentence is heavily reduced if you tell us everything you know about what happened to Tom and Jackie." So, Alonso said, "Okay, I'll tell you." Alonso was a young guy, very impressionable. He was in his early to mid-20s and was actually a jailer. He had met Skylar when Skylar was in jail for that armed robbery. After Skylar got out of jail, Alonso and Skylar somehow stayed friends. They spent a lot of time together. Then, in November of 2004, Skylar pulled Alonso aside and confessed to him that he was, in fact, an international assassin. People paid him to kill people, but only bad people, Skylar said. He told Alonso, "I have a current contract on 2 really bad people, Tom and Jackie Hawks. But I need help carrying this out, and so if you will help me carry out this contract, I will give you $1 million US. Alonso was like, "Man, okay, yeah, I'll help you." So, on November 15th, Skylar, Alonso, and a third man that Skylar had recruited to be a part of this job, this big, muscular, intimidating looking guy who was actually a long-time Southern California gang member, his name was John Kennedy. Those 3 showed up at the parking lot of the dock. They weren't there to finalize the sale of this yacht. They weren't even close to finalizing the sale. They were there to meet up with Tom and Jackie to do a sea trial, a test drive. But when Tom and Jackie arrived, Tom, who was a long-time probation officer and so was very used to being around felons and convicts, he immediately sized these 3 up and thought, "Bad news." When the 2 parties met each other in the parking lot, Skylar started to notice that Tom was definitely apprehensive about getting on a boat with them. In fact, Tom was talking about potentially rescheduling and that today is not a good day. Skylar saw that they were clearly uneasy about getting on the boat with them. So Skylar said, "Hey Tom, Jackie, hold on a minute. I'm going to step aside and make a phone call." Skylar stepped aside and called his wife Jennifer, who was not far away. Just a couple of minutes later, Jennifer pulled into the parking lot, carrying her little 1-year-old baby girl. As soon as she walked over to this group, the dynamic completely changed. Jackie saw this baby and immediately fell in love with it. She wanted to hold the baby and she loved Jennifer. Jennifer was so sweet, so Jackie seemed very much at ease. Tom noticed that, so Tom began to loosen up. Before long, Tom was saying to Skylar, "You know what, guys, today's fine. Let's do the sea trial." The group eventually began to make their way onto the yacht, the well-deserved, to do the sea trial. Right as they were about to get on, Jennifer said, "Hey guys, I can't go on the sea trial. The baby's upset. I've got to go home. I'll see you guys when you get back." At this point, Tom and Jackie had already committed to doing the sea trial, so even if they were a little bit apprehensive going on this boat with just these 3 guys, they put their faith in the De Leons that this was on the up and up. So the 2 Hawks, along with these 3 men, got on board the boat and began heading out towards open water. Tom was piloting the boat. At some point, when they were very far away from the dock and really any land in any direction, Skylar and John came up to Tom and said, "Hey, we want to show you something down in the lower levels of the ship." Tom went with them. They went downstairs into the bedroom. While they were down there, Alonso and Jackie were in the kitchen, which is right above the bedroom. As they were standing there, Alonso and Jackie suddenly heard a very loud commotion coming from the bedroom. Alonso knew what that was. It was Skylar and John attacking Tom. That was his cue. Alonso leapt forward and grabbed onto Jackie. Before Jackie could even figure out what was going on, he had thrown her to the ground, pulled her hands behind her back, and then he pulled out handcuffs that he had and handcuffed her hands together. As soon as Jackie was subdued in the kitchen, Skylar and John came up the stairs. Tom was not with them. They grabbed Jackie and walked her down into the bedroom. Jackie would have seen her husband, Tom. He had been handcuffed and was lying on the bed on his back, so they threw Jackie onto the bed right next to Tom. Immediately, Jackie turned around and looked at Skylar and said, "Why are you doing this to us? We just met your wife. I just held your baby. Why are you doing this? All we want to do is just go back to land and be with our children and be with our grandchildren. Please." But Skylar didn't care. He just turned to Alonso and said, "Put tape on both of their mouths and their eyes." As Alonso was doing that, Skylar went upstairs and began piloting the boat towards the deepest part of the ocean. As Skylar was driving this boat, Alonso and John were down in the bedroom. Alonso remembered looking over at Tom, and Tom was comforting Jackie. He had managed to pull his hand up and he was stroking Jackie's hand, saying to her, "It's going to be okay. No matter what happens to us, we'll be together." Suddenly, the boat stopped because Skylar had reached the deepest part of the ocean. He called down to John and Alonzo to bring Jackie and Tom up onto the deck. Alonzo and John did just that. They marched Tom and Jackie up the steps. They brought them out to the deck of the ship. Then, Skylar forced them to sign the sale documentation for the boat, as well as had them sign additional paperwork that gave Skylar access to their bank accounts. While they were signing these documents, Jackie actually misspelled her last name on one of the signature blocks. She left the S off of her last name. That's not something she would have done by accident. It's pretty clear she did that on purpose to signal to the future that she signed this under duress. After all these documents were signed, the three men led their two captives to the back of the boat. Once they were standing at the back of the boat, Skylar told Alonzo, in earshot of Jackie and Tom, "Hey, go to the front of the boat and get the anchor." Tom and Jackie knew that whatever was going to happen to them next, it wasn't good. So, Jackie began pleading with them to let them live, let them go back to land, let them see their grandchild. Tom managed to shake his restraints from John, who was holding him, and he managed to kick Skylar really hard in the groin. But after that, John leapt on top of Tom and Jackie and subdued both of them. Then, he positioned Tom and Jackie so they were sitting down back to back with their handcuffs connected to each other. Then, Alonzo showed up, dragging this heavy anchor. He finally got it all the way over until it was right next to Tom and Jackie, at which point Skylar grabbed the long metal chain that came off of the anchor. He felt around until he got to the very end of the chain, not the side closest to the anchor that's attached to it, the far other side, the bitter end of this chain. He reached down and he connected that portion of the chain to Tom and Jackie's handcuffs. Once he was sure their handcuffs were securely fastened to the end of this chain, Skylar stood up, walked over and grabbed the anchor. With quite a bit of effort, he managed to lift it up and threw it over the side of the boat. As soon as that anchor hit the water, all Tom and Jackie would have heard for several seconds would be the sound of all of that loose chain that they were connected to being rapidly pulled off the boat and being sucked down into the water. That chain was going up and over this wooden railing, so all they would have heard is just chain links grinding over the railing until finally the anchor pulled the chain tight, at which point it yanked Tom and Jackie towards the side of the boat. Alonzo would say, when this happened, Jackie's head struck the inside of the side of the boat so hard it made a very loud, audible cracking sound. Then, Skylar, Alonzo and John just stood there as Tom and Jackie desperately tried to fight against the weight of this anchor that was trying to pull them off of the boat. Tom was trying to hold on to anything he could to try to hold his wife in place, but eventually, the weight of this anchor, combined with the movement of the boat, was just too much. So, Tom and Jackie were very slowly pulled up and over and off the boat into the water. When they hit the water, they would have been fully alive, fully conscious, as they began their rapid descent to the bottom of the ocean, 3,500 feet below. Alonzo would tell police as soon as Tom and Jackie disappeared below the surface, Skylar let out a woohoo and ran over to the edge of the boat and looked into the water like a giddy child. He was staring at where they had disappeared and he was just grinning and laughing. Then finally, when the water went calm and there were no more bubbles, Skylar just kind of laughed, turned around and made his way back to the cockpit and began piloting the boat back towards the dock. Even though Jennifer was not on the boat at the time of the murder, she was equally involved in it. In fact, the attack was her idea. She wanted more money, and she saw this scheme as being a way of doing that. Remember when she showed up at the dock parking lot with her baby and put Jackie and Tom at ease to help get them out on that sea trial? She was doing that very intentionally to trap Jackie and Tom. She knew what was going to happen out on that boat. She was trying to get them to go so they could be murdered and they could steal their boat. When Skylar was out on the boat, before, during, and after the murders, he would step aside and call Jennifer to let her know how it was going and kind of get her feedback and ask for advice about what they should do next. With that in mind, one of the darker elements of this case has to do with the video camera that was discovered inside of Jennifer and Skylar's house. It was the Hawks video camera, and they had used it over the past couple of years to document their travels out on the ocean. When the police acquired this video camera, they played the tape that was inside of it. At first, the tape shows Jackie filming the inside of the well-deserved yacht, and she's talking about how sad it was that this is probably one of the last times they'll be inside of this boat, but she and Tom are so happy because they found buyers who are going to take great care of this boat, and they're excited about the future. They're excited about their grandchild. Then suddenly this footage of Jackie inside of the boat just totally cuts. It jumps to Skylar and Jennifer at Thanksgiving dinner that year, playing with their daughter and just having this great time. This means just days after Jennifer and Skylar murdered Tom and Jackie in the worst way imaginable, they took their camera and just began using it for their own lives, recording their own life over the memories of Tom and Jackie. Jennifer and Skylar truly didn't care at all about what they had just done. Alonzo would ultimately be sentenced to 20 years in prison. He would have gotten a much more severe sentence, but because he provided all of the details of what happened and was promised a reduction in sentence, he was only given 20 years. Jennifer would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. John Kennedy and Skylar were sentenced to death. That brings us to the end of this incredibly disturbing story. The disappearance of Tom and Jackie Hawks remains a chilling reminder of how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare. If you'd like to dive deeper into other strange, dark and mysterious cases, be sure to explore more videos here on Tangled Logic. We appreciate you watching, and we'll see you in the next story.